The August sun beat merciless across the Kansas prairie as Bryce Anderson spotted the woman stumbling toward his ranch gate, her belly swollen with child and her calico dress soaked through with sweat and dust. He dropped the fence post he'd been setting and ran, his boots pounding the hard, packed earth, reaching her just as her knees buckled and her eyes rolled back. His arms caught her weight before she could hit the ground, the full burden of her and the life she carried pressing against his chest as he lifted her, turned, and ran toward the ranch house calling for help. The year was 1882, and Concordia, Kansas was still rough around the edges despite being established for nearly 3 decades. Bryce had been working his family's ranch alone since his father passed the previous winter, and he hadn't seen another soul on his property in weeks. The woman in his arms was a stranger, her dark blonde hair matted to her forehead, her lips cracked and bleeding from the heat. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, and the weight of her pregnancy suggested she was dangerously close to her time. He kicked open the door to the ranch house and carried her through the modest front room to his own bedroom, the only space with a proper bed. He laid her down gently on the patchwork, quilt his mother had made years ago, then rushed to the kitchen to pump water from the well. His hands shook as he filled a basin, grabbed clean cloths and hurried back to her side. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, pressing a cool, damp cloth to her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, her breathing shallow and rapid. He'd seen heat exhaustion before in both men and animals, and he knew she needed water and cooling down immediately. He dampened another cloth and wiped it across her neck and collarbone, then lifted her head carefully and tried to get a few drops of water between her parched lips. She coughed, sputtered, and her eyes fluttered open. They were green, he noticed, the color of new spring grass, and filled with confusion and fear. "Easy now," he said softly. "You collapsed at my gate. You're safe. I'm Bryce Anderson. This is my ranch." Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, and tears welled in those green eyes. "The baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Let me feel," he said, though he felt awkward about it. He'd helped birth countless calves and foals, but a human child was different. Still, survival mattered more than propriety out here. He placed his hand gently on her swollen abdomen and felt movement beneath, a strong kick that reassured him. "Baby's moving. That's good. But you need water and rest. When did you last drink?" "Yesterday morning, I think." Her words came slow, exhausted. "Maybe longer. I lost track." He held the cup to her lips again, supporting her head. "Slow sips. Too much too fast will make you sick." She obeyed, drinking carefully, and he could see her body accepting the water desperately. "What's your name?" "Where did you come from?" "Sarah," she said after another sip. "Sarah Kane. I walked from Salina." Bryce's eyebrows shot up. "Salina? That's over 50 miles south of here in your condition." The idea of any woman walking that distance while 9 months pregnant seemed impossible, yet here she was, living proof. Fresh tears rolled down her dusty cheeks. "I had nowhere else to go. My husband died 2 months ago, kicked by a horse. The landlord said I couldn't stay without paying rent, and I had no money. I heard there might be work in Concordia, maybe someone who needed help with cooking or cleaning. I thought if I could just get there before the baby came, I could find something." The desperation in her voice made Bryce's chest tighten. He'd been fortunate, inheriting land and a working ranch, but he knew plenty of folks who'd fallen on hard times. The West could be brutally unforgiving. "You're not going anywhere for a while," he said firmly. "You need rest and food and water. We'll figure out the rest later." "I can't impose." Sarah started to protest, trying to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The effort left her gasping. "You already did, and I'm not complaining," Bryce said with a gentle smile. "Now lie still." I'm going to make you something to eat. Nothing heavy, just some broth and bread. Think you can keep that down?" She nodded weakly, and he left her to rest, returning to the kitchen where he stoked the fire in the stove and set a pot of beef broth to heat. His mind raced as he sliced bread from the loaf he'd baked 2 days prior. A pregnant woman alone on his ranch, no husband, no family, ready to give birth at any moment. It complicated things considerably, but he couldn't turn her away. His mother, God rest her soul, would have risen from her grave to haunt him if he'd even considered it. When he brought the food back, Sarah was dozing, her hand still protectively over her belly. He set the tray on the bedside table and waited, watching her sleep. In the softer light of the bedroom, with some of the dust wiped away, he could see she'd been pretty once, before hardship had carved lines of worry around her eyes and mouth. There was strength in her face, too, a determined set to her jaw even in sleep. A woman who'd walked 50 miles pregnant had more courage than most men he knew. Her eyes opened again, and she startled slightly at finding him there. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." "Best thing for you," he assured her, helping her sit up against the pillows. "Here, eat this." Slowly. She accepted the bowl and spoon with trembling hands, and he noticed how thin her fingers were, how prominent the bones of her wrists. She'd been hungry for longer than just this journey. She ate carefully, methodically, and he could see her fighting the urge to devour it all at once. When she finished the broth, she looked at him with something like shame in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "I know this isn't proper, me being here alone with you. I'll leave as soon as I can walk." "You're not leaving until after that baby comes and you're both healthy enough to travel," Bryce said, his tone brooking no argument. "I won't send a woman in your condition back out into the heat. Besides, it's not improper if I'm offering help in good faith. Anyone with eyes can see you need it. But what will people say? You're unmarried, I assume, and I'm a widow, and I'm here in your house, in your bed." Her voice caught on the last words. Bryce rubbed the back of his neck, a habit when he was thinking. "The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away and they mind their own business. As for town folk, they can think what they like. I know the truth, you know the truth, and that's all that matters. Now you need to rest. That baby will come when it's ready and you need your strength." Over the next 2 days, Sarah slowly recovered from her ordeal. Bryce moved his belongings to the spare room and gave her the main bedroom, insisting she needed the comfort and privacy. He brought her meals, changed her water, and tried to make her as comfortable as possible. She slept long hours, her body demanding recovery, and when she was awake, they talked. He learned that she'd been married at 19 to a man named Kane, a stable hand in Salina. They'd been happy enough, though poor, and she'd been overjoyed to discover she was expecting. Then Thomas had been kicked in the chest by a nervous stallion, and he died 3 days later from internal bleeding. The doctor had charged her what little savings they had, and she'd been left with nothing but grief and a growing belly. "I tried to find work," she told him on the 3rd morning, sitting up in bed with better color in her cheeks and clearer eyes. "But nobody wants to hire a woman who's about to have a baby. They said come back after, but I couldn't pay rent until after. It was impossible." "So you decided to walk to Concordia," Bryce said, shaking his head in amazement. "That took guts. Or stupidity," she said with a weak smile. "I nearly died out there. If you hadn't been working near the gate, if you hadn't seen me, I would have." Her hand moved to her belly again, that protective gesture that seemed unconscious now. "We both would have. But I did see you and you're safe now," he said. "That's what matters." That afternoon, as he was mending a saddle on the porch, Sarah appeared in the doorway, dressed but still moving carefully. "I can't just lie in bed forever," she said when he looked up in surprise. "Let me help with something. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. Please, I need to feel useful." He wanted to argue, to tell her to rest, but he recognized the look in her eyes. She needed dignity, needed to feel like she was earning her keep rather than accepting charity. He understood that. "All right," he said, "but nothing heavy, and you sit down the moment you feel tired. Deal?" "Deal," she agreed, and for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger and softer, and Bryce felt something shift in his chest. She proved to be an excellent cook, far better than he'd ever been. That evening, she made chicken and dumplings with vegetables from his garden, and the smell that filled the house reminded him achingly of his childhood, when his mother was still alive, and the ranch had felt like a real home. They ate together at the kitchen table, and the silence between them was comfortable, easy. "This place is nice," Sarah said, looking around the modest but well-maintained house. "You keep it clean." "Learned from my mother," Bryce said. "She always said a clean house was a sign of a clear mind. Though I'll admit it's gotten a bit lonely since she passed. Then my father last winter. It's been just me since then." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "Losing family is hard." "You understand that better than most," he replied, meeting her eyes. "Losing your husband so young, having to face all this alone. You're braver than you give yourself credit for." She looked down at her plate, but he saw the hint of a blush on her cheeks. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified every step of the way, but what choice did I have? I couldn't give up." "That's what brave is," Bryce said. "Being terrified and doing it anyway." As the days passed, they fell into an easy routine. Sarah continued to recover, growing stronger with good food and rest. Bryce went about his ranch work, tending to the cattle and horses, mending fences, and maintaining the property. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together, then sit on the porch as the sun set and talk about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved reading, though she'd had to sell her few books before leaving Salina. He promised to take her to town when she was able, to visit the small library there. She learned that he'd always dreamed of expanding the ranch, maybe raising thoroughbred horses alongside the cattle. His father had been content with what they had, but Bryce wanted to build something bigger, something that would last generations. "You'll do it," Sarah said with certainty one evening, rocking gently in the chair he'd brought out for her. "You have the determination and the skill. I've watched you work. You care about what you do." "Having someone else here helps," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much I missed having someone to talk to until you arrived. Makes the work feel less like work when there's someone to share it with at the end of the day." Something passed between them then, an understanding that went deeper than words. Sarah looked away first, her hand moving to her belly as the baby kicked. "Active tonight," she said, and there was both joy and worry in her voice. "How much longer do you think?" Bryce asked. "Could be any day now," she said. "I'm scared, if I'm being honest. Thomas was supposed to be there with me. Now I'll go through it alone." "Not alone," Bryce said firmly. "I'll be here. I've helped birth calves and foals, and I know it's not the same, but I won't let you face it by yourself. And if there's any trouble, I can ride for the doctor in town. It's only 7 miles. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you're strong and brave, and you've been dealt a hard hand. I know you deserve better than dying alone on the prairie, and I know that having you here has made this place feel like home again." He paused, then added quietly, "I know I don't want you to leave, even after the baby comes." Sarah's breath caught, and she stared at him in the fading light. "Bryce, I can't ask you to take responsibility for me and a child that isn't yours. It wouldn't be fair." "You're not asking, I'm offering," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "Sarah, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a week. But out here, You learn to recognize something good when it comes along and you don't let it slip away. I care about you. I want you to stay if you'll have me, if you'll have this life. I have nothing to offer you, she whispered. No money, no dowry, nothing but myself and a baby on the way. That's everything I want, Bryce said simply. A companion, someone to share this life with, children to fill this house with laughter again. It doesn't matter to me that the first one isn't mine by blood. I'll love that baby because it's yours. Sarah covered her face with her hands and wept, her shoulders shaking. Bryce stood and went to her, kneeling beside her chair and gently pulling her hands down. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. I'm thinking I must have died on that road and this is heaven, she said through her tears. I'm thinking you're too good to be real. I'm thinking I'm terrified to believe this could actually work, that I could actually be happy again. It can work if we want it to, Bryce said, taking her hands in his. I'm not saying it'll be easy. Ranch life is hard and winters here can be brutal. But we'll face it together. Say yes, Sarah. Stay with me. She looked into his eyes, searching for something, and whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll stay. He stood and pulled her carefully to her feet, wrapping his arms around her as best he could with her belly between them. She rested her head against his chest, and they stood there on the porch as the last light faded from the sky, holding each other like they were the only two people in the world. That night, Sarah went to bed with hope in her heart for the first time since Thomas had died. Bryce lay awake in the spare room, thinking about the future, about the family they'd build together. It was unconventional, certainly, marrying a pregnant widow he'd known less than 2 weeks. But the West had never been a place for convention. It was a place for survival, for seizing opportunity, for making your own rules. And his heart told him this was right. The baby came 5 days later, in the early hours of a warm August morning. Sarah's water broke just before dawn, and her cry of surprise woke Bryce from a light sleep. He was at her side in moments, finding her sitting up in bed with a mixture of fear and determination on her face. It's time, she said, and her voice shook only slightly. I'll get everything ready, Bryce said, forcing calm into his voice despite his racing heart. He'd prepared for this, had clean linens and hot water ready, had even borrowed a medical book from the town doctor on a recent supply run. But book knowledge was different from the reality of a woman in labor. The contractions started slow and irregular, giving Sarah time to rest between them. Bryce stayed close, offering water, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and holding her hand when the pains came. As the sun rose higher and the morning grew hot, the contractions intensified, coming closer together and lasting longer. I can't do this, Sarah gasped during one particularly hard contraction, gripping his hand so tight he felt bones grind. It hurts too much, I can't. Yes, you can, Bryce said firmly, looking into her eyes. You walked 50 miles through the heat while carrying this baby. You survived things that would have broken someone weaker. You can do this, Sarah, I know you can. She drew strength from his certainty, from his presence. And when the next wave of pain came, she bore down and pushed with everything she had. The hours crawled by, each one harder than the last, and Bryce felt helpless in the face of her suffering. But he stayed, never leaving her side, offering what comfort and encouragement he could. It was late afternoon when the baby finally came, sliding into Bryce's waiting hands with a lusty cry that filled the room. It's a boy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, you have a son. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but smiling through tears of relief and joy. Bryce quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed him carefully in Sarah's arms. The infant had a shock of dark hair like his mother and his father's strong chin, and when he opened his eyes, they were a hazy blue that might turn green or brown with time. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered, touching his tiny face with wonder. "I'm your mama. I'm so happy to meet you." Bryce cleaned up as best he could, giving mother and child privacy for their first moments together, then checked to make sure Sarah was healing properly. Everything seemed fine, though she was clearly exhausted. He brought her water and a light meal, and she ate one-handed, unwilling to let go of her son. "He needs a name," she said, looking up at Bryce. "I was going to name him after Thomas if it was a boy, but now I'm not sure. This is a new start, a new life. Maybe he should have a new name to go with it." "What about Samuel?" Bryce suggested. "It means God has heard, and it seems fitting. God heard your prayers out on that road and brought you here." "Samuel," Sarah repeated, testing it. She looked down at the baby and smiled. "Samuel Kane." "I like it. What do you think, little Samuel? Do you like your name?" The baby yawned, a tiny, perfect movement that made both adults laugh softly. "I think that's approval," Bryce said. He hesitated, then added, "Sarah, I know you just went through something incredibly hard and you need to rest and recover, but I want you to know my offer still stands. When you're ready, I want to marry you properly. I want to give you and Samuel my name and my protection, but there's no rush. Take all the time you need." Sarah reached out and took his hand, pulling him closer. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For saving our lives, for offering us a home, for being here through all of this. I know I need time to heal, but I also know what I want. I want to build a life with you, Bryce. I want Samuel to grow up knowing you as his father. Whenever you think it's right, I'm ready." Bryce leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, careful not to disturb the baby. "Then we'll go to town next month when you're stronger and make it official. For now, you rest. Both of you." The next weeks were a blur of new routines and sleepless nights. Samuel was a healthy baby with a strong appetite and good lungs, and he kept both adults busy. Bryce discovered that he liked being woken at odd hours to check on mother and child, liked the weight of the baby in his arms when Sarah needed a break, liked the way Samuel's tiny hand would grip his finger with surprising strength. Sarah recovered well from the birth, growing stronger each day. She took to motherhood with a natural grace that amazed Bryce, always seeming to know what Samuel needed before he cried for it. But she also made time to continue helping around the house, insisting that she wasn't an invalid and needed to stay active. One evening, about 3 weeks after Samuel's birth, they were sitting on the porch together, as had become their habit. Samuel was asleep in a cradle Bryce had built, rocking gently in the evening breeze. Sarah leaned against Bryce's shoulder, a gesture that had become more common as the days passed and they grew more comfortable with each other. "I've been thinking about the wedding," she said quietly. "I don't need anything fancy, just the minister and maybe a few witnesses. I want it to be real and honest, nothing pretentious." "Whatever you want," Bryce said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Though I should probably get you a proper ring. Can't have folks thinking I'm courting you without the proper intentions." She laughed, a light sound that made his heart sing. "I think the baby makes your intentions pretty clear, even if he's not yours by blood. But a ring would be nice. Nothing expensive, just something simple." "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Bryce decided. "Talk to the minister, get a ring, and set a date. How does 2 weeks from now sound? Gives you more time to recover, but not so long that we're putting it off." 2 weeks sounds perfect," Sarah agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Bryce, are you sure about this? Really sure? Taking on a ready-made family is a big responsibility." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. These past weeks with you and Samuel here have been the happiest I can remember." When I wake up in the morning, I actually look forward to the day. When I come in from working, I'm excited to see what you've cooked, to hear about your day, to hold Samuel while you rest. This isn't a burden to me, it's a gift. You're both gifts." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "I didn't think I could feel this way again, not after Thomas. I thought that part of my heart was closed forever. But you've opened it back up, and it terrifies me and thrills me all at once." "I'm already in love with you," Bryce said, cupping her face gently. "Have been almost since the moment I caught you at the gate. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. And I promise I'll spend every day for the rest of my life proving it to you." He kissed her then, softly and carefully, mindful of how new this all was. She kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, over his heart. It was their first real kiss, and it sealed a promise between them that was deeper than words. The next day, Bryce rode into Concordia with purpose. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with shops and businesses serving the surrounding ranches and farms. He stopped first at the minister's house, a modest structure next to the white clapboard church. Reverend Morris was a kind man in his 50s who'd known Bryce's family for years. "Bryce Anderson, this is a surprise," the Reverend said, welcoming him inside. "What brings you to town?" "I want to get married, Reverend," Bryce said directly. "In 2 weeks, if you're available." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "Married? I didn't know you were courting anyone." Bryce explained the situation, leaving out no details. He told of finding Sarah collapsed at his gate, of her journey from Salina, of Samuel's birth, and of his decision to make them his family. The Reverend listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "That's quite a story," he said when Bryce finished, "and an admirable decision. Many men would have turned her away or taken advantage of her vulnerability. You've done the Christian thing, offering shelter and protection. But are you certain about marriage? You've known this woman less than a month." "I'm certain," Bryce said firmly. "I know it's fast, but out here, you can't always wait for the perfect time or the perfect circumstances. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, and mine are telling me this is right. Sarah is strong and kind and brave. She's been through hell and came out the other side. That's the kind of woman I want beside me." Reverend Morris studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. 2 weeks from today, then. Saturday afternoon at the church. I'll need you both to come by a few days before for the proper paperwork and counseling. And Bryce, I think you're doing a good thing here. That boy will need a father and Miss Kane will need a husband. The West is no place for a woman alone." "She'll never be alone again," Bryce promised. "Not while I'm breathing." His next stop was the general store where Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, helped him select a simple gold wedding band. It wasn't fancy, but it was well made and would last a lifetime. He also bought fabric for a new dress for Sarah, pale blue cotton with small white flowers, thinking she should have something special for the wedding. News traveled fast in a small town, and by the time Bryce left the general store, half of Concordia knew about his impending marriage. He endured curious looks and a few pointed questions from townspeople, but he answered honestly and without shame. Let them talk if they wanted. He knew the truth, and that was enough. When he arrived back at the ranch, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line with Samuel sleeping in a basket at her feet. She looked up as he dismounted, and the smile that spread across her face made the long ride worthwhile. "How did it go?" she asked, leaving the washing to meet him. "All set for 2 weeks from tomorrow," he said, pulling out the ring box. "And I got you something." She opened it carefully, and her eyes widened at the simple gold band inside. "Bryce, it's beautiful. Try it on," he encouraged. She slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. The Reverend said we need to come by a few days before for paperwork and such, and I got you this too." He pulled out the fabric from his saddlebag. "Thought you might want a new dress for the occasion." Sarah held the fabric to her chest, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," he said simply. "You deserve to feel special on your wedding day." She set the fabric aside and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her close, feeling her shoulders shake with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Sarah sewed her wedding dress in the evenings, her stitches neat and careful. Bryce cleaned the house from top to bottom and made repairs he'd been putting off. They took Samuel into town twice, once for the meeting with Reverend Morris and once for final preparations. The Reverend's counseling was kind but thorough. He talked to them about the realities of marriage, about commitment and partnership and faith. He asked Sarah about her first marriage, about her grief, and how she was healing. He asked Bryce about his expectations and his willingness to raise another man's child as his own. By the end, he seemed satisfied that they knew what they were getting into and were prepared to face it together. The townspeople they encountered were mostly friendly, though there were a few who looked at Sarah with judgment in their eyes. Bryce noticed and kept himself between her and anyone who seemed inclined to make comments. Sarah held her head high, carrying Samuel proudly, and Bryce was struck again by her strength. The night before the wedding, Bryce couldn't sleep. He lay in the spare room, thinking about how his life had changed in just over a month. He'd gone from a lonely widower working his ranch alone to a man about to become a husband and father. It should have terrified him, but instead, he felt nothing but anticipation. In the main bedroom, Sarah was equally awake, feeding Samuel and thinking about the future. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared and the life they'd planned. It felt like a lifetime ago now, that other existence. She would always love Thomas's memory, but Bryce had given her something she'd thought lost forever: hope. Hope for happiness, for security, for a future where she and her son could thrive. She sent a silent prayer of thanks to wherever Thomas's spirit might be, hoping he understood and approved. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that tempered the late summer heat. Sarah dressed carefully in her new blue dress, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned it. She'd washed her hair the night before, and it hung in soft waves down her back. She looked at herself in the small mirror and saw not the desperate woman who'd collapsed at the ranch gate, but someone with purpose and joy in her eyes. Bryce wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to his father's funeral, but he'd cleaned and pressed it carefully. He hitched the wagon and helped Sarah and Samuel up onto the seat, then drove them the 7 miles into Concordia. His heart pounded as the church came into view. Inside, a small crowd had gathered. Reverend Morris was there, of course, along with Mrs. Patterson and her husband from the general store. A few other townspeople had come out of curiosity or genuine well wishes. Doc Wilson was there, the physician who'd been treating Sarah and Samuel. And standing near the front was Jake Miller, one of Bryce's neighbors who'd agreed to serve as witness. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Sarah walked down the short aisle alone, carrying Samuel, and joined Bryce at the altar. The Reverend spoke about the covenant of marriage, about love and commitment and faith. When it came time for vows, Bryce took Sarah's hand and spoke clearly. "Sarah, I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be a faithful husband and a devoted father to Samuel and any children we may have. I promise to work hard to provide for you, to protect you, and to honor you. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Sarah's voice was steady despite the tears running down her cheeks. "Bryce, I promise to love and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to be a faithful wife and partner in all things. I promise to support your dreams and share your burdens. Thank you for saving me and my son, for giving us a home and a family. This I swear before God and these witnesses." They exchanged rings, Bryce sliding the gold band onto Sarah's finger and Sarah placing one she'd saved for and purchased in secret onto his. When Reverend Morris pronounced them husband and wife, Bryce kissed Sarah gently, mindful of the baby between them and the watching crowd. But it was a kiss full of promise, full of love, and when they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. The townspeople congratulated them as they left the church, and Mrs. Patterson pressed a basket of food into Sarah's hands, wedding gifts from the community. Even those who'd seemed judgmental before offered kind words, perhaps moved by the sincerity of the ceremony. Bryce helped his wife and son into the wagon, and they made the journey back to the ranch as a family. That night, after Samuel was asleep in his cradle, Bryce and Sarah stood together in what was now their bedroom. There was nervousness between them, the awareness that they were truly married now, that this was the beginning of their life as husband and wife. "I'm still recovering from the birth," Sarah said quietly. "The doctor said at least another few weeks before we can fully be husband and wife in all ways." "I know," Bryce said, pulling her into his arms. "There's no rush, Sarah. We have the rest of our lives. Tonight, I just want to hold you and know that you're mine and I'm yours." They lay down together in the bed they would now share, and Sarah rested her head on Bryce's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arms came around her, holding her close, and for the first time in months, she felt completely safe. They talked in whispers about their hopes and dreams, about the ranch and Samuel's future, about the life they would build together. And when they finally drifted off to sleep, it was with smiles on their faces and peace in their hearts. The fall came with cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing the ranch for winter. Sarah threw herself into making the house a true home, sewing curtains and quilts, canning vegetables from the garden, and filling the pantry with preserves and dried goods. Samuel grew rapidly, becoming more alert and responsive each day. Bryce would come in from working the cattle to find Sarah teaching the baby songs, or showing him picture books borrowed from the town library. The love between Bryce and Sarah deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and rhythms, learned how to work together and when to give each other space. When Sarah was finally healed enough for them to truly become husband and wife in every sense, it was natural and beautiful, an expression of the deep affection that had grown between them. One evening in late October, as they sat before the fire with Samuel playing on a blanket between them, Sarah made an announcement. "I think I'm pregnant again," she said, a mixture of joy and nervousness in her voice. Bryce looked up from the harness he was mending, his eyes wide. "Already?" "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," she said, blushing. "All the same signs as before. I think this baby will come in late spring or early summer." He set aside his work and moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. "How do you feel about it? Happy, scared?" "Both," she admitted. "Samuel isn't even 3 months old yet. It'll be hard having them so close together, but I'm also happy. This baby will be ours, yours and mine together. And Samuel will have a sibling close to his age to grow up with." "Then I'm happy too," Bryce said, kissing her softly. "We'll manage." "We managed everything else, didn't we?" Winter came hard and cold, with snow piling high around the ranch and temperatures that made going outside a misery. But inside, the house was warm and full of life. Samuel had his first Christmas, too young to understand but fascinated by the decorated pine tree Bryce had cut and hauled in. Sarah made gifts for everyone, knitted scarves and hats, cookies and candies. Bryce gave her a rocking chair he'd built in secret, perfect for nursing babies and soothing toddlers. On Christmas Eve, after Samuel was asleep, they sat together in front of the fire, Sarah in her new rocking chair with Bryce at her feet. "This time last year I was alone," Bryce said softly. "My father had just passed and I was dreading the holiday. I never imagined that by the next Christmas I'd have a wife and a son and another baby on the way. You've given me everything, Sarah." "You gave me my life," she replied, running her fingers through his hair. "You and Samuel would have died on that road if you hadn't been there. Everything since then has been a gift. I thank God every day for bringing me to your gate. I thank him for giving me the eyes to see you and the arms to catch you," Bryce said, turning to smile at her. "Best thing I ever did was run toward you that day instead of away." The winter months were challenging, as winters in Kansas always were. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, relying on stored food and each other for entertainment. But the isolation brought them closer, forced them to truly learn each other. They played cards and read books aloud and told stories of their childhoods. Sarah taught Bryce to cook things his mother never had, recipes from her own mother and grandmother. Bryce taught Sarah to play the harmonica, though she never got very good at it, and they'd laugh until tears ran down their faces at her attempts. Samuel grew and changed, becoming more a little person than a baby. He learned to laugh, great belly laughs that echoed through the house. He learned to roll over and then to sit up on his own. Every milestone was celebrated, every achievement noted and treasured. And through it all, Sarah's belly grew, evidence of the new life growing within her. Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and turning the prairie green. Bryce worked long hours preparing the fields for planting and tending to the cattle that had survived the winter. Sarah, now heavy with child again, worked in the kitchen garden and cared for Samuel, who was crawling now and getting into everything. One afternoon in late May, almost exactly 9 months after that August day when Sarah had collapsed at the gate, she went into labor with their second child. This time, it was easier, faster, her body remembering what to do. Bryce stayed by her side, marveling at her strength, and when the baby came just after sunset, it was another boy, smaller than Samuel had been but healthy and strong. "Another son," Sarah said, exhausted but radiant. "We're going to have our hands full. What should we name him?" Bryce asked, holding the tiny infant with practiced ease now. "I was thinking Benjamin," Sarah said. "Benjamin Anderson. A strong name for a strong boy." "Benjamin it is," Bryce agreed, looking down at the baby in his arms. "Welcome to the family, little Ben." Samuel, not quite 9 months old himself, was fascinated by his new brother. He'd crawl over to wherever Benjamin was sleeping and just stare, reaching out occasionally to pat the baby's head with surprising gentleness. Watching them together, Bryce felt his heart swell with love for his family. Life with 2 babies under a year old was chaotic and exhausting, but it was also full of joy. Sarah managed with grace and humor, nursing Benjamin while entertaining Samuel, somehow keeping the house clean and meals on the table. Bryce helped whenever he could, changing diapers and walking fussy babies and giving Sarah breaks when she needed them. "You're a natural father," Sarah told him one night as he paced the floor with a crying Benjamin while she fed Samuel. "I couldn't do this without you." "We're partners," he said, finally getting Benjamin to settle. "We do it together." The summer of 1883 was prosperous for the ranch. The cattle were healthy, the garden abundant, and Bryce was able to sell several horses he'd been training at good prices. With the extra money, he bought Sarah new furniture for the house and put aside savings for the boys' future. They talked about expanding the ranch, maybe buying the adjoining property if it ever came up for sale. On a warm July evening, as they celebrated the first anniversary of the day they'd met, Bryce and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sun set. Samuel was toddling around the yard under Bryce's watchful eye, and Benjamin was asleep in Sarah's arms. "A year ago today I caught you at the gate," Bryce said softly. "Best day of my life." "I was so scared," Sarah remembered. "I thought I was going to die. I'd accepted it, really. I just wanted the baby to be okay, and then you were there, catching me, carrying me to safety. You were like an angel in dusty work clothes and worn boots," Bryce joked, making her laugh. "The best kind," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Bryce, I need to tell you something. I don't think I've ever really said it properly. I love you. Not because you saved me, or because you gave me a home, or because you're a good father to my sons. I love you for who you are, kind and strong and patient and true. You're everything I could have ever wanted in a husband, and I thank God every day that He brought me to your gate." Bryce turned to her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Sarah, you are the greatest blessing of my life, you and the boys. I love you more than I have words to express. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. This last year has been the best of my life, and I know the years to come will be even better." He kissed her then, deep and full of promise, and somewhere in the yard, Samuel laughed at something only he could see, and in Sarah's arms Benjamin stirred and sighed in his sleep. It was a perfect moment, a snapshot of the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and love. The years that followed were full of the normal joys and challenges of ranch life. Samuel and Benjamin grew into sturdy, energetic boys, always getting into mischief and keeping their parents on their toes. In 1885, Sarah gave birth to their third son, James, and in 1887, their first and only daughter, Elizabeth, completed their family. The ranch prospered under Bryce's capable management and Sarah's shrewd financial planning. They did eventually buy the adjoining property, expanding their holdings and their herd. Bryce's dream of raising thoroughbred horses became reality, and the Anderson Ranch became known throughout Kansas for producing quality animals. Samuel grew up never knowing he wasn't Bryce's biological son. Bryce treated all the children exactly the same, with love and discipline in equal measure. It wasn't until Samuel was 15, tall and strong and looking more like Thomas Kane than Sarah had expected, that she felt the need to tell him the truth. They were alone in the kitchen, baking bread together as they often did, when Sarah found her courage. "Samuel, there's something I need to tell you about your father," she began carefully. He looked up from kneading dough, curious. "What about him?" She told him everything about Thomas Kane, about the desperate journey from Salina, about collapsing at the gate and being saved by Bryce. Samuel listened in silence, his expression unreadable. "So Dad isn't my real father," he said when she finished, and there was hurt in his voice. "He is your real father in every way that matters," Sarah said firmly. "He raised you, loved you, provided for you. Biology doesn't make a father, Samuel. Love and commitment do, and your father has loved you from the moment he met you." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he asked, "Does he know you're telling me this?" "Yes, we discussed it. He wanted you to know the truth, but he also wants you to know that it doesn't change anything. You're his son, Samuel. That will never change." That evening, Samuel sought out Bryce in the barn where he was working. "Mom told me," he said without preamble, "about my biological father and how you met." Bryce set down the tool he'd been using and turned to face Samuel fully. "How are you feeling about it?" "Confused," Samuel admitted. "A little angry that you didn't tell me sooner, but also grateful. You've been a good father to me. The best, really." "I'm sorry if keeping it from you hurt you," Bryce said. "We wanted you to grow up without that shadow hanging over you. We wanted you to just be our son without qualifications or conditions. But you're old enough now to know the truth, and I want you to know that learning about Thomas Kane doesn't mean I love you any less. You're my firstborn, Samuel. You'll always be my boy." Samuel struggled with his emotions, then stepped forward and hugged Bryce tightly. "You're my father," he said, his voice thick. "The only one I've ever known, the only one I'll ever want. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us." Bryce held his son, feeling tears slip down his cheeks. "I didn't choose you, Samuel. God did. He brought your mother to my gate and gave me the greatest gift of my life. I'm the one who should be thanking you." The years continued to pass, marked by the normal rhythms of ranch life and family. There were hard times, droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and crop failures. But there were far more good times: Christmas celebrations and birthday parties, weddings and grandchildren. Samuel married a girl from town and built a house on the far corner of the ranch. Benjamin became a horse trainer like his father. James went to college, the first in the family to do so, and became a teacher. Elizabeth married a lawyer and moved to Topeka. Though she visited often, through it all, Bryce and Sarah's love remained constant and strong. They grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their devotion to each other never wavered. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, just as they had that first summer, and talk about their lives, their children, their many blessings. On a warm August evening in 1912, 30 years after the day they'd met, Bryce and Sarah sat in their accustomed place on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they'd built together. Their children were grown and gone to their own lives, though they visited often. The ranch was thriving under Samuel's management now, with Benjamin as his right hand. 30 years, Sarah said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I collapsed at that gate, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "The best 30 years of my life," Bryce said, taking her hand. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, but they still fit perfectly with hers. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." "Would you?" she teased gently. "Even the part where you had to deliver Samuel with nothing but a book for guidance," he laughed, the sound still warm and rich despite his age. "Even that part. Especially that part. It meant I was there from the very beginning, that I got to be part of bringing him into this world. I wouldn't trade that for anything." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture as natural now as breathing. "I love you, Bryce Anderson, today and always." "I love you too, Sarah Anderson, forever and a day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, content in the knowledge that they'd built something lasting and true. A family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. Years later still, when both Bryce and Sarah had passed on peacefully in their sleep, their children and grandchildren would tell the story of how they'd met. The tale of the desperate pregnant woman who'd collapsed at the ranch gate, and the cowboy who'd caught her and saved her life. The story of how love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances, how kindness and courage could build a family from nothing. The Anderson Ranch continued for generations, each successive owner maintaining the values that Bryce and Sarah had established: hard work, integrity, compassion, and love. And in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the property, 2 headstones stood side by side, bearing the names of the founders. Bryce Anderson, 1858–1920. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he caught her when she fell. Sarah Kane Anderson, 1860–1921. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She found home in his arms. The story of how Bryce Anderson caught Sarah Kane at the ranch gate in August of 1882 became legend in Concordia and beyond, passed down through generations as an example of true love and the power of second chances. Young couples would visit the cemetery and lay flowers on the graves, hoping that some of that legendary love would bless their own marriages. But for those who'd known Bryce and Sarah personally, the real story wasn't the dramatic rescue or the quick courtship. It was the 38 years of marriage that followed, the daily choice to love and cherish each other through good times and bad. It was the way Bryce's eyes would light up when Sarah entered a room, even after decades together. It was the way Sarah's hand would automatically reach for Bryce's whenever they walked together. It was the quiet moments of companionship, the shared laughter, the weathered storms, the celebrated joys. That was the real love story, not the beginning, but everything that came after. The commitment, the partnership, the family they'd built together from nothing but determination and devotion. That was what mattered, what lasted, what made their love legendary. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this earth, Bryce and Sarah were together still, his arms around her just as they'd been that first day when he'd caught her at the gate, holding her safe and promising her that she'd never fall alone again. A promise he'd kept every day of their life together, and a promise that would echo through eternity. The legacy they'd built continued, generation after generation of Andersons working the land, raising their families, and remembering the story of their founding couple. Samuel's great-great-grandson still operated the ranch well into the 21st century, maintaining the original homestead as a historical site and sharing the story of Bryce and Sarah with visitors from around the world. But back in that August of 1882, when Bryce had run toward the collapsing woman at his gate instead of away from trouble, when he'd caught her before she hit the ground and carried her inside to safety, none of that future was certain. All he'd known was that a woman needed help, and he'd been raised to offer it. All Sarah had known was that she'd reached the end of her strength and was grateful for solid arms to catch her fall. Neither could have predicted that moment would be the beginning of a love story that would span decades and touch hundreds of lives. Neither could have known that the choice Bryce made in that split second to run toward trouble instead of away from it would change the course of both their lives forever. But that's the nature of life's most important moments, isn't it? They rarely announce themselves with fanfare or warning. They come dressed as ordinary days, as chance encounters, as split-second decisions that seem insignificant at the time. It's only in looking back that we recognize them for what they were: turning points, crossroads, moments that divided life into before and after. For Bryce Anderson, standing in his dusty work clothes near a fence post on an August afternoon, the moment came without warning. One second he was alone on his ranch, the next he was running toward a collapsing pregnant woman. One heartbeat he was a lonely widower, the next he was someone's hero, someone's husband, someone's father. For Sarah Kane, the moment came in darkness and exhaustion, her vision tunneling as her body gave out. She'd been alone in her struggle for so long, fighting so hard to survive, that the sensation of strong arms catching her felt like a dream. She hadn't expected rescue, hadn't dared hope for salvation. But there it was, in the form of a cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands who'd chosen to help when he could have walked away. That moment of connection, that instant of one human being choosing to help another in desperate need, was the foundation of everything that followed. The love, the family, the legacy, all of it grew from that single seed of compassion planted in dusty Kansas soil on a hot August day. And wasn't that the most beautiful thing? That love, real lasting love, didn't always start with attraction or romance or grand gestures. Sometimes it started with simple human kindness, with seeing someone in need and choosing to help, with catching someone before they fell and refusing to let them face their struggles alone. That was the lesson Bryce and Sarah's story taught, the wisdom that would be passed down through their family for generations. That love is a choice, made daily and moment by moment. That family is built through action and commitment, not just biology. That the greatest romances often start not with a kiss, but with a helping hand extended to someone who desperately needs it. Their story became the gold standard by which Anderson descendants measured their own relationships. When times got hard, when marriages hit rough patches, when the temptation to walk away grew strong, they'd remember Bryce and Sarah. They'd remember that Bryce could have easily turned Sarah away, could have claimed it wasn't his problem, could have protected himself from the complications she brought. But he didn't. He chose compassion over convenience, love over loneliness, commitment over comfort. And Sarah, for her part, could have remained a victim of circumstance, could have accepted charity without offering anything in return, could have taken without giving. But she didn't. She chose to be a partner, to work hard, to love fully and without reservation. She chose to build a life rather than just accept one. Together, they'd created something that lasted beyond their own lifetimes, something that continued to inspire and guide long after they were gone. That's the true measure of a life well lived, isn't it? Not the accumulation of wealth or the achievement of fame, but the positive impact left on others, the love that ripples outward in ever-expanding circles, touching lives that never even knew the source. So when we talk about the love story of Bryce Anderson and Sarah Kane, we're not just talking about two people who fell in love in 1882. We're talking about a legacy of compassion, of courage, of commitment. We're talking about the power of human kindness to transform lives and create something beautiful from desperate circumstances. We're talking about the kind of love that doesn't just exist in the moment, but builds something lasting and true. The kind of love that begins with a woman collapsing at her ranch gate, heavy with child and desperate for help. The kind of love that begins with a cowboy catching her before she hits the ground, carrying her inside to safety, and promising her that she'll never face anything alone again. The kind of love that lasts forever. And so the story ends where it began, at that ranch gate in Concordia, Kansas, where two lives intersected and changed the course of history for everyone who would come after. Where desperation met compassion, where falling met catching, where alone met together. Where a love story for the ages began with a single choice to help rather than walk away. The August sun beats down on the Kansas prairie, just as it did that day in 1882. The ranch gate still stands, though it's been rebuilt and reinforced dozens of times over the years. The house where Bryce carried Sarah still stands too, lovingly maintained as a testament to what once was and always will be. And if you stand there quietly, on a hot August afternoon when the wind whispers through the prairie grass, you might almost hear it. The sound of running footsteps, the soft cry of a woman at the end of her strength, the gentle voice of a man promising safety and care. You might almost feel it, that moment when everything changed, when two souls found each other in the vastness of the American West, when love, real and true and lasting, was born from a simple act of human kindness. That's the power of their story. That's why it endures. Not because it was dramatic or unusual, but because it was real. Because it reminds us that love can be found in unexpected places, that families can be built from more than just blood, that choosing to help someone in need can change the entire trajectory of your life. Bryce Anderson caught Sarah Kane when she fell, and in doing so, caught his own happiness, his own future, his own forever. And Sarah, in allowing herself to be caught, found not just safety but love, partnership, and a home where her heart could finally rest. That's their story. That's their legacy. That's the love that began at her ranch gate and lasted beyond a lifetime, inspiring generations with its simple truth that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with "I love you" but with "I've got you." You're safe now. You're not alone anymore. And you never will be again.